But first, our top story this half an hour. President Trump challenges Andrew McCabe over memos he reportedly wrote following the former FBI deputy director's firing on Friday night. President Trump tweeted this yesterday: "Spent very little time with Andrew McCabe, but he never took notes when he was with me. I don't believe he made memos except to help his own agenda, probably at a later date. Same with lying James Comey. Can we call them fake memos?" says the president. House Judiciary Committee Chairman Bob Goodlatte this weekend also weighed in on the firing when I spoke with him on Sunday Morning Futures yesterday.
Well, I think the Attorney General did the right thing. It was the appropriate decision, given the reports of his having leaked internal information to the media and then giving false information about that, misleading information to those investigating the matter. These are very serious concerns, and they tie into the overall concern about how the FBI handled investigations into the elections last year.
Joining us right now is Harvard Law Professor Emeritus, former criminal defense attorney for O.J. Simpson, and the author of The Case Against BDS. Alan Dershowitz is with us. Alan, good to see you. Thanks for joining us this morning.
Thank you.
Look, I want to get to the breaking news from my interview yesterday with the chairman of the Judiciary Committee, and he said to me he will subpoena the missing documents from the FBI. Now, the FBI, apparently there were 1.2 million documents that Goodlatte and Trey Gowdy have requested, and the FBI only sent 3,000, Alan, and now Goodlatte said he will subpoena those missing documents. Your reaction?
Well, certainly, the American public has the right to see these documents. The American public also has the right to see the report of the Office of Professional Responsibility that justified the firing of McCabe. And McCabe can help that process if he waives his right to privacy and demands that the public be able to see the Investigator General's report, the Inspector General's report, the Office of Professional Responsibility. We, the public, have the right to see these reports, to make our own judgment as to whether this was a political firing or a justified firing. On its face, it seems justified because two very bipartisan offices, Inspector General and the Office of Professional Responsibility, have apparently called for it. But the public has the right to see it and judge for itself. The time has come for transparency and visibility so we can see everything and make our own judgments and not rely on secondary sources to say whether it was political or whether it was justified.
Alan, this is pretty extraordinary. McCabe was the second in command at the FBI during one of the most tumultuous periods in the FBI's history, but he oversaw both investigations. He oversaw the investigation into the Trump campaign, and he oversaw the investigation into Hillary Clinton's use of a private email server. And the difference in terms of those two investigations, Bob Goodlatte told me, was stunning.
Well, I think the reason that we now are suspicious of any of these investigations is that they've become so darn partisan. You'll remember right from the beginning, I called for the appointment of a nonpartisan commission to look into all of these issues so that we can have trust in the investigation. Right now, we don't have trust in the FBI. We don't have trust in the CIA. Look at what the former director of the CIA said the other day, and Senator Ron Paul has taken him to task for it. We don't have trust in the Justice Department. We are losing trust in the investigators. Who will guard the guardians? That's why it was so important, and it still is important, to have a nonpartisan investigation commission, much like 9/11, that the American people can have faith in, and everybody can say, this is nonpartisan.
So you agree there should be a second special counsel then, Alan?
No, I think there should be a nonpartisan investigative commission, not a special counsel.
Okay.
Special counsel work under the supervision of the Justice Department, whereas an independent commission works independently, appointed by Congress, but works independently and reports directly to the American people.
Yep. If that were being talked about, I mean, they're talking about a second special counsel. Here's Bob Goodlatte with me yesterday on Sunday Morning Futures.
More than text, there are other documents as well in the 1.2 million, but we've only seen a tiny percentage of that. The department and the Bureau have been slow, I would say now very slow, in getting them to us.
What is he to do? I mean, they are stonewalling. They've requested, Bob Goodlatte and Trey Gowdy have requested 1.2 million documents, and they've only gotten 3,000.
Well, they should go to court to get them. They have the right to subpoena documents. But the problem is, once you have special counsel, that turns everything into a criminal investigation behind closed doors in a grand jury. The American public never learns anything until the very end of the investigation. Whereas if you have an independent commission, we can have hearings the way we had at 9/11, the way we had when the Challenger went down. That's what we need now. Public, transparent hearings so America can restore trust in investigations, a trust which we've lost now on both sides of the political aisle.
Well, I mean, you saw the reaction to McCabe's firing from the left. Former CIA Director John Brennan slammed the president over the firing. Here's what he tweeted yesterday, Alan. I got to get your reaction to this. He said, when the full extent of your venality, moral turpitude, and political corruption becomes known, you will take your rightful place as a disgraced demagogue in the dustbin of history. You may scapegoat Andy McCabe, but you will not destroy America. America will triumph over you. Meanwhile, Senator Rand Paul fires back at Brennan. He tweets this: this man had the power to search every American's records without a warrant. What's disgraceful is attacking the Bill of Rights and the freedom of every American. Alan, there is now more conversation happening that we're going to find out misdeeds in the State Department, and John Brennan could be one of the people that they are looking at in their investigation, the congressional investigation into the FBI.
Look, John Brennan had a terrific reputation as head of the CIA, but for him to make that statement now calls into question his political neutrality. If he held these views when he was still director of the CIA, if he held views that were so negative about the president-elect or the candidate for president, again, it tells the American public that the CIA is not objective, the FBI is not objective. Everybody has partisan views on who they think should be elected president and who they think will destroy the country. The head of the CIA, the head of the FBI, all these folks have to be extremely nonpartisan. They have to be Caesar's wife. And when they leave office, they can't start telling us how partisan they are and how partisan they may have been. Look, John Brennan has the right to express his views as an individual. But when he is a former head of an agency that had the authority to look into the private emails of everybody, he must not only be beyond politics, but appear to be beyond politics. And I think, unfortunately, he violated that trust when he made this very partisan statement.
Right, and it's more than that. He's been trashing President Trump now for months, and people are wondering how involved he was, because he was still working there at the CIA during some of this time that this congressional investigation is going on. I want to point your attention to Andrew McCabe's statement on Saturday morning after he was fired, because he basically said in his statement Saturday morning that he had the authority to share information with the Wall Street Journal, and he was given that authority by the director, and many people knew that he was sharing information with the Wall Street Journal. President Trump also spoke out saying this. He said, watch Comey lie under oath to Senator Grassley when asked, have you ever been an anonymous source or known someone else to be an anonymous source? Listen to this soundbite. Here is a look back at Jim Comey testifying back in May of 2017.
Director Comey, have you ever been an anonymous source in news reports about matters relating to the Trump investigation or the Clinton investigation?
Never.
Question 2 on relatively related. Have you ever authorized someone else at the FBI to be an anonymous source in news reports about the Trump investigation or the Clinton investigation?
No.
No and never, but McCabe said in that statement he had the authority to share the information to the media, and Comey knew it. So who perjured themselves? Is Andrew McCabe facing perjury charges, or is Jim Comey facing perjury charges?
One of these cases where one of them is not telling the truth. Obviously, we know that Comey leaked and laundered information through a Columbia law professor. He didn't have the courage to stand up in front of the television cameras and express his views that a special counsel should be appointed. So he laundered the information through a law professor. And we know, therefore, that he does and has leaked. And I do think that that should be the subject of an investigation to determine who was telling the truth, because McCabe and Comey seem to have stated under oath very inconsistent points.